The hospital room was silent, except for the steady beeping of the monitors hooked to my frail body. The air smelled of antiseptic, cold and impersonal, a stark contrast to the warmth and laughter that should have surrounded me. But I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the ache in my body. I had been here for 3 days, recovering from a severe illness, one that left me weak, unable to move without pain. And in all that time, not a single member of my family had visited. Not my mother. Not my father. Not even Abigail. On the first day, I thought they were just busy. Maybe they were caught up in work. Maybe they didn't know how serious my condition was. But then, on the second day, I checked my phone. My breath caught in my throat. Social media was flooded with pictures of Abigail's graduation. My sister, the perfect daughter, dressed in her designer gown, standing on stage as our parents beamed with pride. There were videos too. Laughter. Toasts. A massive family dinner celebrating her accomplishments. And I had been left behind. I called my mother, my fingers trembling as I pressed the button. The phone rang once. Twice. She picked up. Hello. Her voice was casual, cheerful, completely unaware of where I was. Mom. I croaked, my voice weak. Where are you? A long silence. Then a light sigh. Evelyn, we talked about this. We couldn't just cancel the entire graduation party for you. I felt like I had been punched. But I'm in the hospital, I whispered. I needed you. Darling, she said smoothly, as if explaining something simple. You'll be fine. The doctors are taking care of you, aren't they? Tears burned in my eyes. You didn't even come to see me. She clicked her tongue, annoyed now. Stop making this about yourself. This was Abigail's big day. You'll understand when you grow up. I was 20 years old. I wasn't a child. But to her, I didn't matter. The call ended with a beep. And that was the moment I knew I was truly alone. By the third day, I stopped waiting. Stopped hoping they would walk through the hospital doors. The doctors came and went. The nurses offered forced smiles, asking if I needed anything. But what I needed was something none of them could give me. I needed my family. And I didn't have one. That night, the nurse walked in, setting a fresh blanket over me. Your family hasn't come yet? She asked, her tone careful. I let out a hollow laugh. They're busy, I muttered. She hesitated before sighing. I see it all the time. Some people just don't realize what they have until it's too late. I clenched my jaw, staring at the ceiling. No, they knew what they had. They just didn't care. A few days later, I was discharged. No one came to pick me up. No one was waiting outside. I was still too weak to walk properly, and yet I had no choice but to hail a cab back home, to the place I no longer belonged. As the car pulled up to our massive estate, my heart pounded. I stepped out, my body aching with exhaustion, but as I walked through the front doors, the house was filled with laughter. Glasses clinked. Music played. Guests chatted excitedly. It was another celebration. For Abigail. Again. I stood there in my hospital clothes, my body still frail, as I watched my family celebrate while I had been left to suffer alone. And not a single one of them even noticed I had walked in. Something inside me snapped. I walked to my mother, who was laughing at the dinner table, a glass of wine in hand. She turned, finally noticing me, her lips pursing slightly. Evelyn? What are you wearing? I stared at her, my entire body trembling with rage. I just got out of the hospital, I said, my voice cold. Where I've been for the past week. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Oh, Evelyn, you're still going on about that? She sighed, shaking her head. You're fine now, aren't you? Something inside me broke. I had spent my entire life hoping, begging for their approval. But now? I was done. I turned, walking toward the door. Abigail scoffed. Where are you going? I glanced over my shoulder, my voice steady for the first time in years. Somewhere you'll never find me. And I walked out. For the last time. The night swallowed me whole as I stepped out of the Lancaster estate for the last time. I had no luggage, no money, no plan. Only the clothes on my back and the painful realization that I had never truly been part of that family. I had spent my whole life chasing their love, their approval, their acceptance. And they hadn't even looked back when I walked away. I was truly alone. I wandered through the city streets, my hospital bracelet still clinging to my wrist, a cruel reminder of where I had come from. The exhaustion from my illness still clung to me, my body weak, my vision hazy from hunger. For the first time I had no home. No credit cards. No security. Just the reality of what it meant to be powerless. The first night I sat on a bus stop bench, my arms wrapped around myself, watching as people passed by, not sparing me a second glance. I tried calling a few people, old friends, acquaintances, anyone who might help. The calls went straight to voicemail. The same people who had once laughed at my jokes, attended my birthday parties, smiled for photos beside me. They ignored me like I didn't exist. Because in their world I didn't. The first job I tried to apply for was at a small coffee shop. I walked in, my hands trembling as I approached the counter. A kind-looking woman glanced up at me. "Can I help you?" I swallowed. I need a job." She hesitated, her eyes scanning me. "Do you have experience?" No. I had spent my life attending charity galas, not working. "I can learn," I said quickly. "I just need a chance." She pursed her lips, then sighed. "We're not hiring." I nodded, stepping back, but as I turned, I heard her mutter under her breath. "Spoiled rich kids never last anyway." I tried another place. And another. Each rejection stung worse than the last. It was like the whole world had turned its back on me. I had always known my family's wealth had given me an advantage, but I had never realized just how much. Without their name I was nobody. And nobodies didn't get second chances. 2 days passed. I had nothing left. My stomach cramped painfully from hunger. My body exhausted from walking. I had nowhere to go. I sat behind an old bookstore, my knees tucked to my chest, my fingers numb from the cold. I had never felt this kind of emptiness before. Not just physically, but in my heart. For the first time in my life, I truly believed I might not make it. That maybe my mother was right. That maybe I wasn't strong enough. Then something happened. A man walked past me, dressed in a sleek suit, the kind of attire my father used to wear. I recognized him immediately, Mr. Calloway, one of my father's business associates. Hope surged in my chest. He knows me. He knows my family. He'll help me. I stood up too quickly, my vision spinning, but I forced myself to step toward him. "Mr. Calloway." My voice was hoarse, desperate. He turned, his brow furrowing as he looked at me. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" My stomach dropped. "It's me," I said, forcing a weak smile. "Evelyn. Evelyn Lancaster." His face didn't change.
No worms. No recognition.
"Nothing. I don't know you," he said flatly. Then he turned and walked away. Like I was nothing. Like I had never existed. I sank back down, my body trembling. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I swallowed them back. Crying wouldn't fix this. Begging wouldn't fix this. My family had taken everything from me. And if I wanted to survive, I had to take my life back. No one was coming to save me. So I would save myself. And one day, when they least expected it, they would regret leaving me behind. The hunger gnawed at me, sharp and unforgiving. My body ached, weak from exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I spent days looking for anything, work, food, a chance. The rejection never ended. Each door I knocked on, each pleading glance I sent, all met with the same response. A shake of the head. Averted eyes. Indifference. The city didn't care about people like me. The world didn't stop for the fallen. But I refused to break. I walked into another diner. The scent of freshly cooked food making my stomach twist painfully. The manager, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, barely glanced up as I approached. "I need a job." My voice was hoarse, my throat raw from thirst. She sighed, looking me over. "Experience?"
No.
Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't have anything available." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay standing. "I'll do anything. I can clean, serve, wash dishes. I just need a chance." She hesitated. For the first time, someone didn't outright reject me. She looked me over, taking in my tattered clothes, the way my hands trembled from hunger. Then she exhaled. "The night shift dishwasher quit yesterday." She crossed her arms. "It's the worst job here. Low pay, long hours, no tips. You want it?" "Yes," I said instantly. She raised a brow. "Come back tonight. If you last the shift, we'll talk. I nodded, relief flooding through me. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something was better than nothing. That night, I worked until my fingers were raw, my legs shaking from exhaustion. The dishes never stopped piling up, and the steam from the kitchen made my head spin. But I pushed through. By morning, the manager handed me a few bills. Come back tomorrow. I left the diner with just enough money to buy food for the first time in days. It wasn't much. A small sandwich, a bottle of water, but it was mine. I had earned it. I sat in a quiet alleyway, eating slowly, savoring every bite. The Evelyn Lancaster of the past would have scoffed at this. She would have wrinkled her nose at the idea of eating alone, in the cold, with nothing but the sound of the city around her. But Evelyn Lancaster was gone, and whoever I was becoming, she was stronger. Days turned into weeks. I worked every shift they gave me, taking on extra hours whenever I could. The exhaustion never faded, but I learned to live with it. I learned to be invisible, to move through the world unnoticed. And then one night everything changed. I was leaving the diner after another long shift when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his sharp gaze landing on me like he had been waiting for this moment. I stiffened, instinctively stepping back. Who are you? He smirked. Someone who's been watching you. That didn't ease my nerves. Why? He leaned against the car, studying me. Because most people in your position would have given up by now. But not you. I said nothing. You're smart, he continued. Determined. Willing to do whatever it takes to survive. My fingers curled into fists. What do you want? His smirk widened. The real question is, what do you want? I stared at him, the hunger inside me shifting into something different. Something sharper. Because I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to never be weak again. I wanted to never beg for help again. I wanted to rise so high that my family, the people who abandoned me, would be forced to look up just to catch a glimpse of me. And this man, whoever he was, had just opened a door. I took a breath, steadying myself. I want power. His smirk turned into something more dangerous. Then get in the car. I hesitated for only a moment. Then, without another word, I stepped inside. And I never looked back. The car ride was silent, except for the faint hum of the city outside. The man beside me exuded power, the kind that made people listen before he even spoke. I didn't know who he was, but I knew one thing. He wasn't offering help out of kindness. People like him never did. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my mind racing through possibilities. A part of me knew this could be dangerous. But another part, the part of me that had suffered on the streets, that had been abandoned in a hospital bed, that had begged for help and received nothing, didn't care. I had nothing left to lose. The car pulled into an underground parking lot, sleek and polished, nothing like the rundown places I had gotten used to. He stepped out first, waiting for me. I followed, my legs stiff from exhaustion. He led me into a high-rise building, past a lobby filled with men in suits, their gazes sharp and assessing. No one stopped us. No one questioned why a girl in cheap, worn-out clothes was being escorted through a place clearly built for power. We took an elevator to the top floor. The doors opened into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretching below like it belonged to him. Sit, he said, gesturing to the leather chair in front of his desk. Iset. He poured himself a drink, swirling the liquid in his glass before finally looking at me. I know who you are, he said. Evelyn Lancaster. Disowned. Homeless. Once part of one of the wealthiest families in the city. I flinched at the mention of my last name. Not anymore. He smirked. No, not anymore. I waited, my heartbeat steady despite the tension. What do you want? He took a slow sip of his drink, then placed it down with precision. I want to make a deal. I leaned forward. What kind of deal? You have nothing, he said. No home, no family, no power. But you're smart. You survived where most wouldn't. And more than that, you're angry. I clenched my fists under the table. He was right. I was angry. Angry that my family had abandoned me. Angry that I had spent years thinking I mattered to them, only to realize I was disposable. Angry that they got to keep living their perfect lives while I had been left to rot. You want revenge, he said smoothly. I looked up, my eyes locking onto his. I want more than revenge. I want power. He smiled. Then I'll teach you how to take it. I should have been hesitant. I should have asked more questions. But I had already been through hell. And the only way out was forward. What's the catch? I asked. His smirk didn't waver. Loyalty. You work for me, you learn from me. And when the time comes, you'll have everything you need to destroy them. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Destroy them. The people who left me to die. The family that had never truly been mine. I took a slow breath. Then, I reached across the table and shook his hand. And just like that, Evelyn Lancaster was gone. In her place, someone else was born. Someone stronger. Someone ruthless. Someone my family would never see coming. The training was brutal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was evolving. Vincent Blackwell was a man of power. The kind that didn't come from inherited wealth, but from taking opportunities that others didn't see. Under his mentorship, I learned the rules of power, manipulation, and control. I wasn't handed anything. Every skill, every lesson, every painful reality I had to earn. But I did. I learned how to read people. How to listen not just to their words but to their weaknesses. How to walk into a room and make people notice me before I even spoke. And most importantly, I learned patience. Because revenge wasn't about striking first, it was about striking when it mattered most. I changed my name. Evelyn Lancaster was dead. She had been weak, trusting, naive. Now I was Eve Whitmore. A name that held no past, only the future I was going to build. Vincent introduced me to the right people, people who controlled businesses, markets, and entire industries behind closed doors. He taught me how to leverage favors, how to negotiate deals so that people walked away thinking they had won, only to realize later that they were in my debt. And slowly I built something of my own. A business empire that was untouchable, ruthless, and growing. A name that would one day overshadow Lancaster Enterprises completely. And the best part? My family had no idea I was the one orchestrating their downfall. The first sign of their desperation came 3 years later. Lancaster Enterprises was bleeding money. It started with small losses, contracts falling through, stock values dropping, investments mysteriously backfiring. My father tried to recover, pushing Abigail forward as the face of the company. My mother still played the role of the perfect society woman, pretending everything was fine. But behind the scenes, they were scrambling. And I was watching, waiting, because the moment was coming. The moment when they would finally realize that they needed help. And when that moment arrived, I would be the one standing on the other side of the table, smiling, waiting for them to beg. The call came sooner than I expected. I was sitting in my office, overlooking the skyline of a city I now owned in ways my family never could. My assistant entered, holding a sleek phone in her hand. "Miss Whitmore," she said carefully, "you have a call from Lancaster Enterprises." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle in. For years, I had waited for this moment. For them to come crawling back, to realize that the world they had built was collapsing around them, to finally understand what it meant to be desperate. And now that moment had arrived. "Put them through," I said. My father's voice was different than I remembered. The commanding, arrogant tone was gone, replaced with something strained. "Miss Whitmore," he began, clearing his throat. "This is Robert Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Enterprises. I understand you're a woman of influence in this industry, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership." I almost laughed. He had no idea he was speaking to the daughter he had abandoned. I glanced at the reflection of myself in the window, a woman they wouldn't recognize. The naive girl they had discarded had been replaced by someone ruthless, calculating, and untouchable. "I see," I said, keeping my voice smooth. "What kind of partnership are you looking for?" He hesitated. "Our company has faced some unexpected challenges. We need a strong investor to stabilize our future." A strong investor. They were begging me to save them. The irony tasted sweet. "I don't make investments without understanding the full picture," I said. "Perhaps we should meet in person." My father exhaled in relief. "Yes, that would be ideal. Are you available for dinner at the Lancaster estate?" That estate. The home they had once thrown me out of without hesitation. A slow smile curled on my lips. I'd be delighted. The night of the dinner, I arrived in a sleek black car, dressed in power and precision. I stepped out onto the familiar driveway, my heels clicking against the stone, the air thick with memories. Nothing had changed except me. A butler led me inside, where my mother, father, and Abigail were already seated at the grand dining table. Their expressions were carefully masked, but I could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the desperation they tried to hide. They stood as I entered. "Miss Whitmore," my father said, extending a hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you." I took his hand, shaking it firmly. He didn't recognize his own daughter. "Likewise," I said smoothly. "Thank you for the invitation." Dinner was polite, forced, and tense. They presented their case carefully, pretending they were still in control. My mother smiled, my father tried to seem confident, and Abigail, who had once mocked me, belittled me, taken everything that was mine, sat in silence, clearly sensing the shift in power. I let them talk. Let them convince themselves that I was just another businesswoman they could manipulate. Then, as dessert was served, I leaned back, my fingers tapping lightly against my glass. "You haven't asked me why I'm so interested in Lancaster Enterprises," I said casually. My father frowned slightly. "I assumed a woman of your status would see the potential in reviving a legacy like ours." I smiled. "Oh, I see the potential, Mr. Lancaster." I watched him closely as I said my next words. "I see the potential in destroying it." The room fell silent. My mother's face paled. My father stiffened. Abigail froze mid-sip of her wine. "What?" my father asked, his voice quieter now. I tilted my head. "You don't recognize me, do you?" They exchanged glances, confusion flickering in their eyes. Then I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It's me, Evelyn." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the table. "Abigail?" She looked like she had seen a ghost. For the first time they truly looked at me. Not at Miss Whitmore. Not at some investor. At the daughter they had abandoned. "No," my mother whispered, shaking her head. "That's not Evelyn, you." "I survived," I said coldly. "Despite everything you did. Despite leaving me in that hospital bed while you celebrated Abigail. Despite throwing me away like I was nothing." My father's face turned ashen. "Evelyn, I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "You don't get to say my name," I said, my voice like steel. "You lost that right the day you chose to forget me." They scrambled, desperate now, begging for understanding. "We thought you'd come back," my mother pleaded. "We wanted you to prove yourself," my father added. "We're still family," Abigail muttered, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. I let them talk, let them reach for excuses. Then I stood. The final moment of power. "I gave you a chance," I said softly. "When I was lying in that hospital waiting for you to care, I gave you a chance. And you chose to leave me behind." They watched me, their expressions breaking. They wanted me to forgive them, to give them another chance. But I wouldn't. I leaned forward, whispering the final words that would haunt them forever. "I hope Abigail's graduation was worth it." Then, without another glance, I walked away. And this time they were the ones left behind.